Welcome to CS Week Marketplace, third Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern webinar series. CS Week Marketplace offers fresh perspectives and strategies presented monthly by knowledge specialists from the CS Week Conference 37 Platinum and Gold sponsors. I am John Sild, and I'm with CS Week, and I'll be your moderator today. CS Week and Conference 38 will be held from May 5th through the 9th at the Henry B. Gonzalez Convention Center, San Antonio, Texas. Early registration will open in mid-November. This program will be recorded and available for playback, as are our other archive presentations found under the Educational Venues / third Tuesday link on our website. Today's program is the Data-Driven Utility, how the modern utility leverages intelligent data across the enterprise, presented by Mr. Todd Hall, Senior Industry Advisor with SAP. Attendees are encouraged to upload questions in the Q&A panel as they arise. However, all questions will be held until after the presentation for the Q&A segment. Please address your questions to all and not just the speaker. We are pleased to have with us Lisa D'Alessandro DeChristopher. She's the Industry Manager Director for SAP Utility Practice. She's on the call with us, and she will now introduce Mr. Todd Hall.
Great. Thank you, John, and thank you for joining us today. Since the introduction of smart meters and smart grid technology, the allure of big data and the potential it has to transform our utility industry has been taunting us all. The big data dilemma has created a virtual data tsunami across our entire landscape. Today's modern utilities are laser focused on implementing new technologies and embracing new use cases, which are focused on turning these big data stores into actionable insights. It gives me great pleasure today to introduce our guest speaker, Todd Hall. Todd is a Senior Industry Advisor with SAP, and he comes to SAP following a very successful career in utilities which spanned over 25 years as an executive and a director, managing in all areas of utilities retail and wholesale operations. Most notably, Todd has served in roles leading functional areas of meter to cash, REIT, regulatory affairs, customer service, cost center, energy efficiency, and wholesale sales, which is reason for him to have a unique perspective on this new big data dilemma. Todd, on behalf of SAP, we'd like to thank you for your time today and turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate that introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, good noon to everybody that's on the call. You know, one of the things we want to talk about today, and please anticipate probably a 30 or 35-minute presentation from me, because we want to leave time for Q&A with the attendees on the call. But my intent today is to have a conversation with you, hopefully not a monologue or a lecture, but to have a conversation about what's happening in utilities today. I think that the most of us on the call will definitely agree that there are certain trends that are happening to utilities that impact the way we do our business, and it's causing change and some disruption in the way we do business. We'll talk a little bit about, as Lisa pointed out rightly, about real-time data platform, what's happening there. How do we drive that one engagement that is so critical to our overall business and customer satisfaction and acceptance of our programs? And how do we drive a deeper engagement, a deeper relationship with our customers? And then lastly, we'll provide just a quick summary and then hopefully open up to a whole series of questions that you'll have. You know, today we're facing, Lisa used the word tsunami, we're approaching fall, so maybe it's hurricane we want to talk about. But what's happening in the utility industry is the role of the consumer and the way they are engaging with our regulators, whether we be investor-owned utility or municipal and publicly owned utility. Our regulators are seeing a more active role with our consumer, and the consumer is seeing us in a different light, a different view, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. Complex regulatory oversight is for sure taking place. Because of that consumer engagement, that stakeholder engagement, the regulators are seeing a greater impetus to engage in a deeper set of oversight with utilities, whether it's in the state level or at the community level. because of a number of factors, utilities are facing a flat revenue growth, now flat. Some utilities will argue, and I was one of these, that no, it's not flat, it's growing at 1% or maybe 1 or 2% per annum. And to some degree that is growth, but it's not substantial growth, particularly in light of the fact that our costs of operating our utilities are increasing as well. And to add even more complication in this hurricane of activities or tsunami of activity is that we have this constant change of new law, of new regulation, and new activity that's causing us to change the paradigm by which we operate our utility. The utility I started with a couple of decades ago, that operating paradigm has changed dramatically in the last couple of decades, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. That's important to understand because the way we do business today is so substantially different than we've been accustomed to over our careers. And finally, infrastructure. At the end of the day, utilities are measured on what? Electric utilities, gas utilities, water utilities, we're all measured on what? Well, we're measured on reliability. Yes, we want good customer satisfaction, we want that engagement with our customers, but we are also focused on assuring that we have KD/SAIDI for your electric utility, KD/SAIDI numbers that are incredibly high. And we're performing our services to some degree at almost unrealistic levels, and that's important. So we want to look at these items, and there's some interesting things that are happening worldwide. I've had a chance recently to visit with SAP colleagues in Europe and in the Middle East and PAC Asia, and we've had conversation about, well, what's happening with your utility? And one of the things that is happening worldwide, not only here in the United States, but worldwide, is infrastructure requirements continue to grow. By 2035, it's believed and been estimated that nearly $17 trillion in new electric infrastructure will be required. Worldwide water consumption is doubling every 20 years. Imagine, and that's built out just in some of our most populated countries, and as we build out to other parts of the world, that will continue to increase. So infrastructure is going to continue to be a driver and a push. New monies are going to be necessary to build out this infrastructure. I mentioned this earlier, our consumer, and the role of the consumer is changing. In many areas and in many classes of customer groups, they have expressed the interest, the consumer, has expressed the interest in becoming a partner with the utility, either as a generator of electricity or in just having a greater understanding of how they control the way they utilize the energy. Consumers are becoming a greater social advocate, not only for themselves, but for all the classes of additional customers around them. And again, having that greater input with the regulatory bodies and having a conversation with the regulation groups and oversight groups as to how the utility needs to operate. We see this also happening in the business sector. Businesses are taking on a more pro-consumer, proactive engagement. And then finally, service expectation is changing. And why is that? What's curious is that, for me anyway, is over these years, I've seen the relationship and the expectation of the utility's performance in front of the consumer, by the utility, and from the consumer to the utility, a change in expectation. The expectation no longer is, well, you're a monopoly, do the best you can for me, and that's fine. Now the change is coming where the expectation of service by the utility needs to be equal to that of other service providers that aren't utility. It may be your rental car company. It may be your cell phone company. It may be another provider that is providing a service that has thorough and complete engagement within the organization and directly to the consumer, directly to the individual. All that said, our businesses, as I mentioned, are going through a transformation, a dramatic transformation. We're seeing that as we move forward, that smart energy business models, the whole idea of having greater knowledge and greater information about how consumers, our clients, our customers are consuming energy, how they're doing it, when they're doing it, how we can communicate back to them, is driving dramatic change. Interaction between the consumer and the producer. The producer is not always necessarily the utility. It may be a third party, maybe an independent power producer in some states. It may be a marketer in some states. It may still be a utility in some states. But that change in relationship and expectation of service is changing as well. And then finally, the implementation of our partner programs. The third party is becoming more engaged, more involved in how utilities operate. I had a chance to visit with one of our clients on one of the island states in the Pacific, and they have well over 20% of all their energy coming from renewable energy sources. And much of that's coming from third parties, not necessarily just from the utility. And so how they engage with that third party and keep that third party involved and engaged affects the way the utility certainly operates on a technical operational level, but also affects the way the utility operates before their consumer and the way the utility operates before their regulator. All of this needs to be seamless. So there's a new expectation of agility. Our consumers are changing their expectations and their view of our companies. They're changing the way they expect us to deliver the energy and how they deliver the energy. Their levels of expectation of reliability remain high. And one of the cases that we'll make today is based on how is it that we can increase this agility based on knowledge. Today, our analytic tools, generally speaking, traditionally are historical data and historical tools. When we look at our KPIs review what we did last month, or what we've done in month end, or what we've done in the last week. So we've gone from, we are currently in a historical level, in the traditional level, and looking at historical data. When we want to query data, it usually involves a requirement that we involve not only the business unit of considering what kind of data they're looking for, what kind of KPI they want to develop, but also involves our IT departments to develop the reports for us. Traditional statistics is being used. Finance guy that I am, I appreciate statistics, love statistics, but statistics come with a random sample of the universe of data. Now, true, that has been a tried and true way of measuring and determining trend, but there may be something new in the offing that will change that. And finally, the N is of a very small sample of data. You know, these calculations that we're making we're building in error, we're determining that there's a potential for error, so we build that into our expectation of the statistic, and much of it is because our sample size is very specific to the market that we're looking at and the data we're looking at. What's happening now is that with our new advent of SAP HANA, which is a new higher level computing technology, we now have the ability to look at data in its totality. As well as, probably equally important, is that, as we know, not all of our data stores of information come from the SAP data store, from your ERP or your financial information or your customer-based information or your human capital management information. Some utilities still have data stores that are around the utility that are operational technologies that could be very easily tied back into the utility's core activities if we have the ability to pull that together. SAP HANA has that ability to pull the disparate resources together. When we look at the entire data set, it gives us a different view of how we think about data and how we think about making decisions. I would submit to all of us in our discussion that there's a probability, a high probability, that the way we manage our businesses and how we make decisions today is on the precipice of change. And the precipice of change is, rather than having historical data, we now have the opportunity to look at real-time data in its real activity, in its real impact, and do it in a manner that's on a level of N equals all. The data source is for all the data, giving us a different view, a deeper view of how we look at data in its entirety and how that correlates with what has been traditionally seen as disparate data sources. giving us another view, a deeper view, I think, and I hope you'll agree, of how that data can interpret for us what's happening in our marketplaces, what's happening in our operating systems, what's happening with our customer expectation, and what's happening with our customers' sentiment about how we do business for them and on their behalf. Now, I have to admit I'm from the Midwest, so a picture of 4 silos makes a lot of sense to me. Some of those of you that aren't from a farming community probably won't appreciate the humor in this, but I certainly do. Sorry, self-serving as it is. But effectively, we have all these traditional data streams. And I'm sure you all will agree that these are the data streams and data stores that we have. Unfortunately, much of these data streams have a tendency to be siloed. They're independent of the total corporate view. No harm in that, other than there's a missed opportunity cost in being able to look at the data in its entirety, whether you're in T&D operations, finance, field force, generation, customer, fuels and markets, real-time fuels and markets silos, and tying that back into finance, looking at human resources and what's happening with our valued employees. Today, we have the opportunity to take all this data and put it onto a platform that allows us to look at all the common and then disparate data stores and see new vision as to how our utilities are operating. And you'll note, I think, that what's important with all the cartoon characters we have on the slide, that what's important is you look at the disparate data that's involved, it changes or gives us a different view as to how we look at data that is truly disparate. How will we look at smart meter data as it's compared to demographics, and how we look at that compared to operating systems data, mobile data? How do we look at that compared to what's happening with our SCADA and our SCADA data and operating of our T&D systems? All questions that are coming forward that give us greater, deeper insight. The opportunity comes in those 3 areas, though, and I want to take just a moment to hit on those 3 areas. And obviously, it's the challenge of the data, all the disparate data stores. How do you pull all that together? That's important to do. The structure of the data. How do you take the time series? How do you pull all that together? How do you take information technology, and by definition, we're going to use this as we know as SAP, all of your ERP systems, your finance systems, your accounting systems, your enterprise asset management systems. How do you pull that together with your CIS and billing and customer information, with your human capital? How do you pull that all together with operating technologies, SCADA data, meter data, etc.? And how do you make sense of all that? The technology, we've kind of hit on, I kind of hit on some of the technology innovations today, touched just on the idea of the SAP HANA. We'll touch on that just a little bit more. But the opportunity and the promise that we have for the change in our organizations is so substantial with the advent of technology. And the technology is changing as well on how that service is delivered to us. And probably the one thing I want to point to directly that's substantially important to me is when you look at the advent of data and technology and the tools associated with that, is what's the impact on people? Are we ready to make decisions in a different light? How do we prepare our new managers for the coming years to learn from and understand the knowledge, that the institutional knowledge that the utility carries forward with it, but now begins to use new tools? We certainly never want to dismiss the fact that in our organizations are people that have been with us for 30, 35, 40 years that know the system so well that they don't necessarily need additional data. They intuitively understand how the system operates. And we don't want to dismiss that. We want to embrace that and continue to learn from that knowledge. But now offer the advent of additional data, additional level of knowledge and information, and how does that affect our people? How can we take that and include the idea of a data scientist? You know, I read an article here a while back that talked about the new career of the future, the new valued career of the future will be data scientists. As we continue to expand and completely change our landscape and how data drives our knowledge and paradigms. We'll need people that will begin to come into our corporations and our businesses and be able to help and assist us in correlating data. Not taking random sample, but correlating data across the data sets across the corporate enterprise. And finally, the idea of the ITOT, bringing together those internal documents, those internal data sources of operations of our utility, and bringing that together with how we operate our utility. How can we best facilitate that organization and that joining of data to give us deeper insights, whether it be financial insights, operating insights, predictive maintenance insights, based in finance, based in physical delivery of the service. How do we bring all that together? The other change that's happening, we've heard about cloud. You know, we've heard. I know that as a longtime utility guy, that I've heard our associates at SAP, as well as just across the technology spectrum, you know, over the last 5-7 years, talk increasingly about cloud usage. And I also am aware that utilities are a little hesitant to get into the utilization of cloud, quite simply because they're concerned about security of the data. And that's appropriate to have that reservation, but also that reservation is, in terms of security, is changing and is developing to a non-argument at this point. We are seeing greater levels of security. Certainly we have far-flown discussion about security breaches in some of our organizations, but I think that when we talk about SAP HANA and its cloud, we're talking about private clouds. We're not talking about commingled clouds. We're talking about something that is high level, high degree security that gives us a new opportunity. Keeping that in mind, it doesn't dismiss us from having on-premise data stores, right? Doesn't dismiss the idea of having the ability to do all this data information, data analysis, and gain keener insights from hardware and software that resides within our four walls. It gives us an option, though, and it gives us an option with a greater, more impactful, lower for total cost of ownership, or TCO, of our systems. So it gives us additional insight, gives us additional opportunities. Now, CS Week. How do we prepare our conversations for May? And how do we get ready for those conversations not only with SAP, but also with all the vendors? And how does your utility begin to prepare the conversation about how we talk to our customers? Many of us across the country, and even across the world, are beginning to get more and more data on our customer and their operations, whether they do business, or their patterns of consumption. So what does that mean for the utility? What does that, probably more importantly, mean for the consumer? Well, on the utility side, there's some obvious operations capabilities. You know, unfortunately, fraud and theft of service is an issue. Probably will be forever, but it's still an issue. Understanding data and understanding the amount of consumption and the pattern of consumption gives an insight to the utility to be able to prevent that. And at the end of the day, we all will agree that if we reduce the amount of fraud and theft detection in our utility, it also benefits all of the other consumers. So the far less than 1% or 1/10 of 1% of the people that are individuals that are defrauding or stealing energy, it provides an immediate benefit to the full balance of the organization and all of our consumers. Then you kind of walk through here, all the smart meter analytics, customer segmentation. One of the new technologies and applications that I think is just meaningful as ever is customer sentiment. How do you determine how your utility is responding and is being impacted by news in the marketplace? How many of us have had a service outage that lasted for 10 minutes, 30 minutes, a day, a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, and how is the market community responding to our efforts to renew service, whether it's a natural disaster? Unfortunately, we've seen some of these issues not only in the Midwest, but certainly on the East Coast. But how are we communicating? The sentiment analysis app allows the utility in real time to go and see how things are being received by consumers, which gives, I think, an opportunity for utilities to have a greater level of insight on how they change their messaging and what they need to be doing in terms of not only renewing service, but how they communicate their efforts. Because we all know, we all agree, I think, that utilities work hard every day, all day, every day, to make sure that their reliability standards are very high, that they're doing a good job of delivering service to their customers. And then how do we treat our customers as partners with customer energy management? Data allows us the opportunity to do two things. And think about this as two sides of the same coin. One side of the coin is the internal operations of the utility. How many of us have demand response programs that we use an average cost for the period? We know that our demands are running particularly high in that particular part of the season, and so we initiate a demand response program, whether it's an open call or to customers in membership to the program, or for industry or for consumers, or in agriculture where they're turning down their irrigation systems. We make that call out, and we know that in general the average cost is X. Wouldn't it be more effective on a financial level for the utility to be able to have the data, to be able to look into our systems, look into the market, and have a real dollar value of that cost of displaced utility consumption? So great opportunities here. And it goes back to, I think, what we talked about was that consumption concept. How do we take all this diverse data and pull it together? You know, in that last case, where are the data stores? We talked about consumer, so we have customer information. What else did we talk about? Well, we talked about market pricing. We talked about contract information with members in a controlled reduction, demand reduction program. So there's a number of aspects that reduce energy for the benefit of the overall utility and to the individual members. SMA is certainly the godfather of all big data in utility operations. So when you look at utilities, historically we've always pulled the data read, the meter read once a month, and then we wait anywhere from 28 to 33 days, maybe 27 to 33 days in your utility. And we have that data. We have a handful or two of data points that we pull. Maybe more in some of the heavy industry, but in general, you know, it's a pretty simple data pool. Today, we now have the opportunity with technology to have data stores that are growing at a rate that is just unfathomable, not more than 10 years ago. It's interval data, but it's interval data being pulled on, what, 15 minutes, maybe 10, maybe 5, maybe minutes. Amazing data information. And it's data that gives us an opportunity to see how we can better engage our customer. Is there a better way when we do our pricing, our rate making, that gives us with this data, rather than an average view of cost and an average view of price, that would give us a more specific view of, and real-time view of cost and price, giving us a better opportunity to encourage our consumers to consume energy that's most cost-effective for them and most effective for the utility in its overall operation. Smart Meter Analytics continues. I mean, you continue to add on the value proposition here. You know, you look at how do we retain customers in those that are those liberalized states that have additional individuals and you know, marketers that are selling electricity to consumers, and the core utility, the traditional utility, is continuing to act as a marketer, but also a supplier of the transmission and distribution. How do you retain those customers? How do you increase your degree of knowledge? How do you increase your ability to provide what the customer is looking for to base their consumption, to increase the value of their consumption, and how do you structure that? When I said, as I mentioned earlier, about getting into greater detail, knowledge and information on utilities and on rates, how do you monetize the value of a tariff? How do you go from a world of being averaged and taking average costs, average price, to create a tariff that you believe will have impact with good research, analysis that we've done over all these years? How do you take that to the next level? And with data stores that we have available to us with Smart Meter Analytic, it gives us a wonderful opportunity to really tie in how we are managing our pricing mechanisms. How do we monetize that tariff design? And then how do we change our portfolio of services? One of the biggest challenges the utility has is making sure that they meet the exacting needs of every customer that they have. But isn't that a crazy way to think about it? But isn't that what we are trying to do? We have 1 million customers. That 1 million metered customer account list actually is a service of what? 3 million, 4 million people? And of those 4 million people that we're serving, each one of them has a different expectation, although perhaps separated by a slight degree of difference. But nonetheless, they all have exacting needs, wants of their utility. With the greater amount of data, it gives us a greater insight, and it gives us a greater level of opportunity that we can meet the needs and change portfolios to meet a greater number, a larger population of those individuals that are involved in making decisions about their energy consumption and how we can provide that knowledge. The other side, we talked about the regulatory involvement with the state PUC or your utility board or your city council. Having greater knowledge and transparency of data and information gives greater opportunity for the regulator to feel comfortable as to what the utility is talking about and how they're saying the impacts of their cost structures are changing. It gives greater comfort to the regulator that the information that they see is trustworthy and transparent and understandable. And then finally, the whole idea of gaining better traction with our efficiency programs, whether those efficiency gain programs are done before the consumer to drive lower costs for the utility or lower cost for the consumer, or how about both? Let's design programs that provide equal value across the board to utility and consumer. And if we have the appropriate amount of data from Smart Meter Analytics, that'll give us better opportunity, more insightful opportunity, I think, to be able to look into our programming and redesign or to continue to refine, probably more importantly, to refine our data and refine our programming and the value offer that we make to our consumers. You know, I covered a lot of information in just about 32 minutes. Hopefully this has given you some insight, and hopefully this has given you an opportunity to begin to question how your utility is engaging in data. I'd like to turn it back over to Lisa for some concluding comments, and then also want to engage and invite you to ask questions and as to how we are moving forward with this new transformational opportunity with looking at big data. I thank you for your time and your interest. I look forward to our conversation. Lisa?
Great. Thank you, Todd, and thank you for sharing your insight. Clearly, we can see your personal touch in terms of had you had these tools when you were at the utility, the areas that you would be focusing on. In your presentation, you talked a lot about transparency of the data and the real-time nature of the data. We have a few questions that have come in around that. First of all, someone had asked, you mentioned something called HANA. Can you just describe or explain what HANA is?
Well, the danger of me answering that, Lisa, is that I'm not a technologist, I'm just a business guy, so I'll do my best. But HANA, SAP HANA, is a new higher level of computing. It's been referred to as in-memory, and for those of us on the call that are technologists, they'll know the difference of that. But effectively, this is a new computing engine that can take not only SAP data, but data from across the organization and be able to pull that in and do nearly instantaneous computation against all of the data, whether it's common data or diverse data, and be able to do a real-time view and give answers to questions or queries of data across the enterprise.
Great. So HANA is a game-changing platform that really enables the utilities to think about new use cases that they may not have been able to enable before. When it comes to the customers, the consumer experience today is changing rapidly. Utility customers today are benchmarking their experiences with Expedia and Amazon and expecting the utility to have the same proactive outbound communications. With HANA and with all the new analytics around big data, whether it's data coming from a meter or data coming from other devices, outage data, and you even mentioned the convergence between IT and OT. How will this transform the customer experience? In other words, what predictive analytics might the utility look to do to change the customer experience?
Yeah, what a fun question that is. The idea that's coming in terms of being predictive with the customer is, we've got in some locations, some utilities around the country are beginning to test the predictive capability of account call-ins. So if a caller is calling into the call center, being able to pop a screen based on what we anticipate to be the probability of need of that call. And this is without using IVR. This isn't about the engagement. It's just about the analysis associated with if that account is calling, what's the probability of need in popping up the screen to get it to a agent, to a CSR that can engage them more rapidly. I think that what's happening is that expectation of consumer is looking for the utility to be more intuitive, looking for the utility to understand what they want, how they want it, when they want it, and be able to expand that relationship to a deeper level. I mentioned earlier that there's a wide range of expectations that our consumers have. Some of our consumers, particularly those consumers that are more apt to engage in technology, expect that intuitive insight as to what we do, how we do it, because that's how they engage with the providers of their other services. Some of our other customers may not want that level. They want a different level. And so you've got this wide spectrum of being able to look at each customer individually and provide a level of service that meets their expectation.
Great, thank you. You mentioned also, the flat revenue that we've been experiencing over the past few years. How might having better access to information help us to generate new economic development programs, or perhaps identify opportunities to cross-sell or upsell customers on new energy services? Do you have any thoughts on that?
One of the opportunities I had in my previous career as a utility fellow was I had the opportunity to run and direct our economic development programs with my staff and with our community leaders, the Chamber of Commerce and with the cities and the counties, and help drive new business opportunities in our service areas. And one of the challenges we had was that we didn't have sufficient data and sufficient knowledge of the operations of our utility that when a large client or large prospect was thinking about integrating into our service area, we didn't have the ability to do instantaneous rate design. What we had was we had our published tariff, and we didn't have anything that we could use as an incentive for that prospect to move their business to hire 100 or 1,000 or 5,000 employees of our fellow citizens in the community and locate their facility in our jurisdictional area, because we didn't have the necessary data. Yeah, the data was there. We did research. We did analysis, but it was done in an Excel spreadsheet. It was done to some degree in some average. It was done with institutional knowledge of how the system works and where our power supply comes from. Imagine if you were to take that level of analysis, and I imagine this all the time, is if you take additional knowledge, additional information, and more specific information, how better of a response can you give to the economic development team that's trying to attract this new business that's going to employ hundreds and thousands of our fellow citizens in the jurisdictional service area that we have, to give them enough information to make a decision to select your area rather than another area outside of your jurisdictional area. So data gives greater insight, greater information to be able to increase the vitality of your community.
Great answer. We had another question that came in. We've talked a lot about how the utility can use analytics to change customer behavior. How would the utility use any of this data for its own internal purposes? What kind of efficiencies might the utility gain for its own internal processes?
You know, we've talked about customer. You're right, Lisa. We've talked about customer and the analytic on customer. Some of the analytic that goes on with all of this customer data and finance data and operating data gives, I think, also keener insights as to how the utility can actually increase its optimization in efficiency and increase its optimization in capital spend when they look at predictive maintenance as an example. We're working with a utility in the west of the United States that is looking at predictive maintenance at a highly new level. They're looking at a degree of insight into transformer utilization that shows them in kind of a fanned report how the transformer is operating and behaving, to the point that they can now begin to make prediction as to when that transformer, in a tighter line of parameter, when that transformer may have an error in operation and perhaps fail. And it is just, again, it gets to that level of that sense of new data insight, that new level of capability for the utility to see how their systems are operating. On the finance side of the organization, we're working with another utility that is looking to decrease the amount of time to close their monthly books. We all know in our organizations and our utilities that we've got about a 10, maybe 14-day, maybe a 10 business day period at post-month to close the books, right? It's been a traditional activity undertaking with big data and with capability with SAP HANA to be able to do this near real time, if not real time. Being able to look at a close of the books on a daily basis, taking that through the operations of the utility to the month end, and being able to close rather than in 10 business days, to close the books in 2 or 3 business days, saving a whole week, a 7-day period of close. Well, on the front end, that sounds, yeah, sure, but the reality of it is that would then give you an opportunity in the finance or accounting departments to be able to focus on other activities. Perhaps treasury is something you want to focus on as well. Perhaps there are other things that are happening that you want to get greater and deeper insight by gaining efficiencies of your operations. Those are a couple of insights, Lisa.
Great. Yeah, we see big data across the entire enterprise. You really pointed out not only can we look at it from a consumer perspective, but also from an asset perspective and from a financial perspective. One last question before we close and turn things back over to John. Have you any thoughts about how we might use HANA and this new real-time platform to handle things like rate cases? We have a question that says, have we given any consideration to improving the life cycle of a rate case?
You know, for the audience that's sitting out there, the participants that are sitting out there, some of you probably participate in rate increases and rate cases that you present to your regulator. So this is a unseen voluntary participation aspect. Raise your hand if you have a number of disparate data points that you have to pull together, probably in an Excel spreadsheet, to prepare your case before you go to your regulator. They raise their hand. Hopefully there's about 100% sitting out there that's now raising their left or right hand. So the idea is that we're in the throes of having conversations with the utilities of how do you take this process and how do you go through and develop a rate case process that takes not only historical data, your financial data, your operating data, your actual data, budget and actual. How do you take that and then move that into current budget years, the actual and budget, and then how do you take that and move into forecast and move that forecast not only from generation but T&D and customer and finance and treasury? How do you take all that, pull that together, which is for the most part the basis of how we develop our rate increase, ascertain what the variance is, and then perform on top of that a cost of service model that allows the utility to figure out, well, so I have a $30 million need for additional monies. That based on my cost of service model and the 4 components that make up my rates, I now have the opportunity to determine what the impact is going to be in near real time as to what that will look like to all of my consumers. So when I go before the regulator, now I've got a tool that I can have a conversation with all the data, with staff of the regulator, or with the city council, or with my board members, or with my fellow executives, and have a conversation about what if. What if our assumption on this forecast for the change in fuel is not right? What if it's different? What if the market conditions in electricity are different? What if the market conditions in natural gas are different? And being able to change in real time the ability to have an insight on that data gives a whole new meaning as to how pricing can be done. It gives a whole new meaning on how utilities can engage with their regulators as well as their stakeholders, with their customers on how they develop rates, providing additional transparency, giving opportunities for people to more fully understand what the magic is of how the utility operates. Great opportunities in rate case making, and it will reduce the amount of labor necessary, not only in the development, but also in the execution and presentation before the regulator, because now you've changed the discussion to interrogatory and legal conversation back and forth to more of a, let's have a conversation with the data. Let's talk about it, let's document it, let's talk about what the what-ifs are and what the considerations are, not only with stakeholders, but regulators, consumers, and the folks within the utility.
Great. Sounds like a great topic for another webinar, having a conversation with your data. Well, thank you, Todd. I wanted to just send out a warm appreciation on behalf of SAP and our entire utility practice to those attendees today. We appreciate your interest and look forward to participating on events coming forward with CSC. John, at this point, I'd like to turn control of the call back over to you.
Thank you so much. Lisa, Todd, what an informative presentation. The questions were great questions being asked by our attendees. We had a great number of attendees on our call, and in fact, just so you all know, that we are getting quite a few thank yous and great presentations on our feedback. So it was an awesome session. So we thank you for your time and the work that you put into bringing this to us. As we top the hour, we want to be respectful of your time and conclude promptly. If you do have a question that comes to mind later in the day or tomorrow or whenever, send an email to Lisa Collins in our CS Week office. We will forward those questions to our presenters, to both Todd and Lisa, and we'll get a follow-up with you on your question, make sure it's answered. We want to thank all our attendees for being on our webinar today, and this concludes our webinar. You all have a great day.
Thank you so much.